All right, go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today for our live Wisconsin Recovery Q&A. We're here with Dave Macmaster, otherwise known as Mac around these parts. My name is Jessica Geschke and I'm here with Monte Ball.
Hello, everyone.
We also have our other staff members present as well, Megan, Mary, and Wes. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. It's Recovery Month. We're super excited. It's September, it's Recovery Month, and this is our first live in September, and we wanted to be able to kick it off with some strong members of our community who are in long-term recovery. And the first person we thought of course, was Mac. And so we're going to just have an in-depth conversation with Mac about his recovery and how he got to where he is today. So thanks for coming on with us, Mac. We're super excited to have you. Why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about your road to recovery. You have some impressive years under your belt. 1956, correct?
Yes.
So why don't you go ahead and just share a little bit about, like, I don't even know that I've heard that story. Like, how did you get here? Where do you come from? What catapulted you into this recovery field? Using those words, I'm in recovery. Like, how did that happen to where you are today? This pillar in our community of strength, hope, inspiration, and somebody that we at Wisconsin Voices turn to when we need, help on things.
Well, my name is Dave Macmaster, and I'm in long-term recovery from my alcohol and tobacco addictions. I began in my recovery on October the 8th, 1956. It was Thanksgiving Day in Canada, which was on a Monday. And I went to my first meeting to be able to start addressing what my drinking had done to my life, which was tremendous chaos. And there's a lot of bad things that happened during the years that I was drinking that brought me to the point of desperation where I was suicidally depressed. And just had no place to go and no way to get there. And I happened to run into, because it's in my family, I'm one of those that have a lot of addiction in my family history. My dad was in recovery in 1949, only 10 years after the first AA book came out. So our family's been in some kind of recovery for a long time. Now, I had been recently kicked out of the Canadian Navy. I had joined up during the Korean War. And I got in so much trouble drinking while I was in the Navy that I was discharged with a psychiatric discharge, which was basically, they thought I was crazy because of the things I was doing. And so I arrived back home in Welland, Ontario in Canada, near the Niagara Falls, with my intention was to stop drinking and straighten out my life. I couldn't make that happen. I won't go into the details of what led me to my final desperate place where I had to either kill myself or find some way out. And I ran into, I was given some help with some people that my father knew. I was not on good terms with my father because I was, I was kind of a shameful character in my family at that time. But he had a sponsee in this program he was in who came to talk to me and told me all about what had happened to him, and it was very similar to mine. And I agreed to go to a meeting that night, and I did. His partner and another man came and picked me up and took me to this meeting. And I really liked what happened to me there. I had a kind of a sense that these people could help me. I wasn't sure I believed that. But I went there, and I've been in recovery ever since that first meeting I went to, and I have not, the desire and the need to be drinking went away. Was it a miracle? Was it I finally made the kind of decision that would stick? I don't sometimes know that, but I know the facts are that I'm in long-term recovery, and that'll be 64 years next month that I've been in this recovery life. Now, later on in my life, I got involved with the addiction treatment programs. I was trained in Iowa when I moved to the United States. And so I've been balancing and blending my personal recovery, which has been extremely important. It's kind of like a foundation. I couldn't function until I was able to shut down my active addictions. And that's a fact. You know, it's not like trying to convince anybody, okay, that of anything other than the factual truth that I could not control my drinking. I got some help for it. That's the important thing. And doing it on my own was not working. I needed help, not necessarily because I'm weak. I'm kind of a proud person. I don't like the idea of being weak or being needy, although I've been both at different times in my life. But I don't particularly like that. I like to have positive kind of confidence when I can. And I needed some support from other people who are successfully doing this. And that's true today. And I wanted to say how grateful and honored I am to be part of our recovery months in September here in Wisconsin. Now, how I ended up in Wisconsin in the first place is another story, which I won't go into in any detail, other than it was one of the best things that's happened to me. And so I got into addiction services in 1974, 75, and I've been involved with that now. Started off as a counselor. I was in a 12-month program for training alcohol and drug programs just soon after the Hughes Act was passed in this country, which basically was when treatment as we know it now began. And I've been a part of that ever since it started in the mid-70s. And we were one of the first group of individuals that were trained to become alcohol and drug or now addiction counselors. And so I've been involved in that both as a clinician, as a therapist, counselor, and then I also helped start programs. And I've directed 2 programs, been an administrator in a large program in La Crosse. And I was one of those ones in those early days when I did not have the education requirements that I would require today. And they were looking for just about anybody to do this. They didn't know how to treat alcoholism and drug addiction until they were able to pass that law and start funding treatment. So I've been involved in that professional part of it, and that means the public policy part of it, because I've been active in the state organizations, counselors programs and the treatment providers programs, and WIOTA when we had it. So here in Wisconsin, we were lucky enough to have a woman leader, Flo Hilliard. She wouldn't mind me using her name, I hope. The fact of the matter is that she started off the program, STARS program, helping women to get into recovery. She knew a lot about personal recovery. She knew about how to help females get into recovery. And then she was the first to start the Alliance for Recovery Support, which is, in fact, we have inherited everything, most of what she started off to do. And so WIOTA, which no longer exists, then had this program. And so Flo Hilliard and that other people then formed this Wisconsin Voices for Recovery. I happened to have been at the very first meeting when we organized this. And I'm on the advisory council, helping to hopefully provide some guidance and firsthand experience with recovery. Now, when I went to represent Wisconsin at Philadelphia, I met up with William Bill White, who is probably, most of us who've been around for a long time will recognize his role in being a recovery advocate that has put the credibility on this idea of doing recovery support. And so I've been working with him. I've been coordinating an advisory council myself, helping to get tobacco integration into, so that we are able to treat tobacco disorders in treatment, which we've not been able to do since the 1970s. We did not accept that as part of what needed to be treated. In fact, smoking cigarettes was a part of recovery and treatment, and in some places remains the same today. So I got involved with all of that. Now, I'm also an advocate for 12-step programs who have a program based on anonymity. And I support that for what they do, because their programs are based on personal recovery, one alcoholic, one addict helping another one, as what the foundation there. And because in those days when they started those programs, there's terrific stigma attached to being an alcoholic or a drug addict. That's still true today, but nothing like it was then. If you look back and do some of your studies on addiction history, you'll find in 1952, when they first started to identify alcoholism and the drug addiction as disorders, they had us placed under personality disorders in 1952. You can check that back. And the category they had us in was sociopathy, which meant, according to those definitions, that an alcoholic or a drug addict had no conscience, that didn't care for anybody except getting high or drunk. Now, that was the beginning back in the 50s. Now, that has all changed now, and we now have got these disorders in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, where it belongs as tobacco use disorders, opiate use disorders, and the language has changed from chemical dependency to AODA and addiction to this substance use disorder language that's going on now, which is the common language we're being used. But the recovery support programs that we have now are so important because now we don't have to be anonymous or invisible. Somebody like me and everybody, many of the people who will probably see this program here are people in recovery. Now, we're not shameful or shame people. We're people, for what reason or another, have an extremely life-threatening and life-ruining disorder called addiction. And so we need to have people who can come forward and say, look, I have this disorder, and I've got a history to prove it. And I'm not like that anymore. I'm in recovery. I'm trying to do something constructive with my life. I'm trying to make my life count. And I don't want to be invisible and anonymous. I support it for the 12-step program to have that as a tradition. It's been very effective. They have millions of people who are successfully staying clean and sober with that. But in order to get into the public realm, we need to have a recovery message that people will accept and will compliment and say, I think that's a good idea. Now, this particular program in Wisconsin is really important. We really have got an alcoholic culture here, and drugs as well. And what do you think is going to happen when they legalize marijuana? Now, there's all kinds of talk about what's going to happen with that, all the tax money that's going to come. But you know, there are people who smoke pot and use marijuana who are going to get in trouble with it, just the same as we did with the alcohol and drugs that we have. And we're going to need to be prepared. This is not just going to be just something for collecting more taxes. There are going to be more people who use marijuana who will also be using opiates, who will also be drinking booze, smoking cigarettes, and everything else. And that's going to be a public safety and a public health issue that the community is going to have to deal with. So we need to have some credible solutions for that, and having thousands of people. When I did a kind of a survey of what's going on in Madison, for example, imagine Sheboygan and La Crosse and everywhere else could have similar stories. This place has actually got thousands of people in positive recovery. People who are not drinking and drugging and are having lives now. But the general public doesn't know that because we're not that obvious. Now, having this recovery month is one way of being able to demonstrate. We're not a bunch of people trying to draw attention to ourselves because we want people to kind of like us. It would be nice if they do. But we are the people who've got the message that recovery is really possible. Every one of our stories kind of suggests that. Now, I've gone on at some lengths here since to that question about what I'm doing. Well, let me tell you a little bit, but I wanted to tell you about my son, Jason. My son, Jason, when he just turned 19, was sentenced to 15 years in the Texas prison system for drug-related crimes. Now, he got out of there after 4 years and went on 11 years of parole. And while he was on that, he had 3 drunk driving convictions, and he wasn't sent back to Texas, but and he eventually got the message that he has the Macmaster family disease, addiction. And he's now 20 years, and he's clean and sober for 20 years. He's got a good position down in North Carolina. He's married. He's a really respectable, responsible guy. I really like him. He's a fun guy to be around. And just like my dad before me, we found an answer in a group or a program where alcoholics and addicts are helping each other not only to get clean, but to cope with and get through all the life challenges and difficulties we have, and share our victories and our celebrations of how well our lives are going now that we're not using and drinking and drugging. So that's a positive, uplifting story. I'm like one of those prodigal son guys. You know, I went off into the world as a hopeful young man, 18 years old, and went off to serve my country during wartime. And I ended up being a disgrace. My family knew what had happened to me. And this was not the future that they had hoped for me. My parents hoped for me. But I got so far lost in addiction that if I hadn't got a helping hand to get out of it, I would never have lived to be 25, never mind the 85 that I now am. And by the way, quitting smoking in 1963 is probably one of the explanations. Well, I'm still alive today at 85. So that's a bit of a little share there, letting people know who I am. I'm just an ordinary guy. I'm living by myself right now in a little apartment in Madison. I'm involved with the virus, working with this the same as everybody else, working for my home, but I'm still working. I'm working as a consultant, a managing consultant for the WINTIP project, which is the Wisconsin Nicotine Treatment Integration Project. And we have been working now for a dozen years to be able to get the laws changed so that people who have tobacco use disorders can find their way into treatment programs and get some help there. And somebody said, well, what's the big deal there? Well, tobacco caused and related diseases kill more of us than alcohol and all the drugs we all use combined. And it's an inside issue when that's a fact and truthful. We've been able, with our School of Medicine Center for Tobacco program, research and intervention program, to be able to get the data. So it's not just a myth or a rumor that this is happening. So in addition to being able to stay clean and sober, some of us, like Flo Hilliard and others, have found their way into the helping professions, have found our way to have a voice so that what we have learned through all these years of experience, provide a voice. Now, for example, one of the leaders in the state's addiction services treatment programs work right now is a man I know in recovery. He's been in recovery for many years. He is now leading the entire program that I'm talking about. He wouldn't want me to share his name. He said that's a private sort of thing, but there are people like him and Flo Hilliard all over the place, and not excluding the people who are on this telecast or this Zoom meeting. I'm looking up at there, and I see people that I can share. There's one weaving back at me. That we are the people that, in addition to being in recovery ourselves, have taken on the responsibility of taking a message that people can admire and be grateful for. These are fantastic stories of personal change and growth that any skeptical person, when they get to know some of the people who are in recovery, they come to our rallies at the Capitol and get to talk to us and meet with us. So we've got that important story. So in addition to taking a look at the stigma of having this bad reputation and saying that's bogus now, we don't deserve to be described that way, we also have all kinds of recovery support services. Now, isn't it interesting? We've got recovery coaches and certified peer specialists. Well, who are they? Well, they're a new part of the workforce emerging, and these are individuals who are helping other people with their life experiences in recovery and how they got here. And so we've got these different ways of improving what we're doing and giving the credibility that we wanted all this time. I don't have much of a platform. I can't tell you how grateful I am for having this chance. I've learned a lot of things I've wanted to share, but I'm not in a place, I don't have any funds, and I don't have this personal support team. So I would like to be able to carry this message and have that we're all carrying here and take it out into the world and into the community. But what's an 85-year-old guy who's still working part-time, I'll have to tell you that, is what am I doing out here? You know? Well, I'm doing that because I'm carrying on what the first day that I got into recovery, I was given a new chance at a new life. And those people who have not arrived here yet deserve the same. And if there are treatment programs that are properly funded, if we have the kind of ongoing support, because they made the mistake of thinking in the treatment first started that this was an acute disorder. And if we could give people some treatment, they'd go through treatment, whether it was 30 days or outpatient or whatever else is, all they need to do was to quit drinking and drugging and everything would be fine. But this is a chronic disease. It doesn't just take one treatment experience for most of us. We need ongoing support for what we're trying to do. So that's my message to anybody who happens to tune this in. It's a personal message, but it's not a message that I don't share with the people who are on this program. We get together, there's something about the common denominator of being in recovery ourselves or being a recovery ally. You don't have to be in recovery yourself to be a part of the recovery movement. You know, my family members are in recovery movement. So I guess I want to stop now because I get excited when I talk about this. And I think there might be some specific questions that I might be able to answer a little bit shorter. Sure, but people who know me, who chuckle and know me, know that my motto is never ever use a sentence when a paragraph will do.
Well, thank you so much for that. You know, I have a series of questions, but I think you hit almost every one of them. I wanted to quick chat about, yeah, I think you did hit almost all of them. Well, I mean, I do have one question for you. It's something that kind of, I think, weighs heavy on the minds of those of us at Wisconsin Voices, but also around the state right now. It is Recovery Month, but and as emotionally, you know, draining right now, I think that we find ourselves in with COVID and racial disparities and other things that are going on in our nation. The overdose rates and death by suicide and death of alcoholism, these rates are continuing to increase. We hear about it daily. And then, you know, we hit September and we're trying so hard to like, yay, it's Recovery Month and get so excited about Recovery Month. And you said something earlier today, right before we were logging on, about multiple pathways. And you were stressing how it doesn't matter what you're in recovery for or from or how you got there. And I thought, you know, as we were sitting here and I was listening to you, like that message needs to be driven home 100 times over, because we have people in our state dying because they can't access resources or because of that stigma and shame. And I just kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit about that comment that you made about multiple pathways and what that means for you, being a person in recovery this long in our state for so many years and seeing everything that you have seen. How does that still hold up and still true to this day?
Well, I think that's an important truth, that to face that these are trying, troubling times. We've got issues that we didn't have, that I didn't have when I came into recovery, because we've got a pandemic to deal with. We can't have the individual closeness that we've had. But this is, for me, it's nothing new in one sense. When I first started in this work in the 70s, we didn't know anything about how to do this. We had some ideas. Minnesota came up with a Minnesota model, and they started combining some of the 12-step ideas with personal counseling. But we just didn't know really what we were doing, but we experimented and learned along the way. So now in 2020, we've got a lot of expertise on how to help people with addictions once we get them into our programs. We've got a lot of people who are trained in various ways, like the different pathways are. We've got all kinds of very series of what addiction is. We've got the brain disorder information we didn't have at all in the 70s, which we know is commonplace. We've got now, we had 12-step programs, but we did have some faith-based programs, the Salvation Army and others that back even then, they're still doing that faith-based work. We had Celebrate Recovery that came along when this was a Christian base, but before that they had a 12-step program up in Minneapolis for Christians who had their higher power, was their basic Christian religion. But when we started this stuff, in 12-step program, they decided, the people who wrote about these things, that okay, we need to have a higher power in order to recovery. If we probably are going to need to have some outside support. So we learned to define a higher power in different ways. It started off with basically a religious kind of idea. The word God was in it. But then the people who started this realized that everybody was not in a place to accept that. So they broadened it out. So it could be a higher power. It could be a group of individuals. It could be your family. It could be any place where we could draw help. Well, now we're in this COVID thing here, and we're having to learn again how to help. Now, in the middle of this, with the increase in opiate overdose and suicides, as people get into despair, I described as my despair. You know, if I had been a person who owned a gun, a firearm, in some of the deep depression, I have a wonder. Would I have not taken my own life? I think I was in places where I could have. And I've been working in addiction long enough to be around enough suicides to know how true and painful that is. So that's why having a kind of a support program for ourselves while we're going through this with this Zoom we're doing on here, new technology, it's difficult, but we're going to open new doors from this. The thing is to get through this, to get through everything. So the hope that a person who can recover from addiction can recover from all the struggles that go in economic struggles that go with what's going on right now is probably having a hopeful thing. We're going to get through it. We're human beings. We've survived all these centuries, and somehow we're going to put it together. We're going to have some people. There's probably people among us right now who are putting together solutions that have not emerged yet. We're going to find some scientific ways to help us. We're going to find ways that people are going to be able to expand their idea of a higher power into putting together little groups. For example, I've been working for over a decade now to try and create something called Families United Against Death from Tobacco, which is basically trying to have some support for family members like my family who went through horrible pain as our dad died horribly from lung cancer and heart disease. You know, it's no different for somebody whose family member is sick and dying from tobacco or already has, as it is from somebody who's maybe in their 20s or 30s or 40s from an overdose. See, so trying to find new ways of bringing people together where we can share what we've learned and what we believe and what our hopes are will get us through. I know that's what's been getting me through. You know, I'm kind of a loner now in some ways than I was before, and I don't really like it much, but I'm adapting to it. So I think that having something like the Wisconsin Voices for Recovery, it says, okay, we have an agenda. Our agenda is to reduce the stigma of addiction. Our agenda is to provide supporting services of whatever we can for people who are not only getting clean and sober, but are going through all kinds of life troubles like this is, and being able to support each other without all the differences, without the race, the religion, and everything. If you're in recovery, you say you're in recovery, you're my brother, you're my sister, and you are who you are. We're different in so many ways. It's awkward. That's what happened to me. When I finally found myself accepting people different than me, I realized it was awkward. I didn't like being awkward. I wish I could just relate to them just as I could my brothers and sisters in my family, but it took a little work, kind of life changing. My thinking had to change so that I could be able to accept people for who they were and put those barriers aside and say, okay, if you're in my family because you say you are, if you're in my program, or you're in my group because you're there, then that gives me this equality that we can help each other get through our divorces, through our kids coming out of prison. Having your youngest son going through all of that and the trouble he caused. As a dad, it broke my heart. I don't want to even talk about it. But that's our truth. Well, if you're in recovery, then we have got those truths. We've got a person in Wisconsin, Madison here, whose half his family were murdered. And he ended up at a meeting that night. for support. I'll never forget that. So that's the kind of emotional connections that we can have, when we have a chance. So that's a long answer to a brief question, but we're in this together. But we've got a program. We've got the Voices for Recovery. We got the men and women of all ages and all races and everything else. And one of the things that we learned in recovery, and were demonstrated in recovery, in the 64 years that I've been involved in recovery and attending various meetings, at no time in any of those meetings has I ever seen anybody excluded because of their race or their criminal record. It may happen in places that I haven't been, but ever since I got here, that put those barriers down, and that person, whoever it was, and it was my brother and my sister, family member, and I had a kind of implied obligation to accept them and love them if I didn't even like what they did or whatever happened. It's that kind of openness, open-heartedness that recovery offers to people who come here. It's not an easy journey for everybody. It's hard to put down our prejudices and our closed thinking, closed minds, but it's possible. And we have a forum here, and we've got a program here that invites anybody who wants to come and join us to do that. And so anybody who happens to listen to this or watch this is welcome to join us. It's free, and whatever your gift or whatever your contribution can be, there's an opportunity here to offer it. And for a person who didn't feel he didn't fit anywhere, to be in a place that I could fit in almost everywhere, what kind of a gift is that? Well, so I don't know where these words come from. That's always been the case of in recovery. If your heart is right, your mind that may be clouded, but for some reason, sometimes words and ideas pop out when I'm trying to be able to be helpful and trying to make a difference. I'm 85, I'd like to leave something behind. If I can, I'm egotistical enough that I'll be long gone. Maybe somebody will know who I was, and I won't know who they are.
We will know, Mac. We will know.
Okay, there you are.
So if anyone has any questions for Mac, please feel free to go ahead and leave those in the comment section. And I think we have one or two questions left for you that Monte had.
Yeah, I do. Mac, first off, man, that's wise words. I would love to connect and pick your brain, most definitely. I'm a baby in the recovery world right now. But question I have for you, man, I always love to ask people this question, and who knows, what your answer is going to be, but I'm very intrigued. I want to know, like, what's your favorite part about all this?
My favorite part?
Yeah, what keeps you going?
Hope. That's it. There's a chance for anybody coming here. There's a chance. It's not guaranteed, but there's a chance that things can get better. And that's this. Since you asked me, that's it. The reality of hope is real if I open my heart and my mind to it. But it's so easy to shut that down. If things are too rough, they're too difficult. I'm not one of these people who believes in a lot of magical kind of solutions. This takes an effort to make changes, but the idea that's possible, would be the number one thing that I would probably answer to that.
Okay, awesome. Well, it looks like we're just a little bit over, and I'm looking here in the chat. Someone said, thank you, Mac, for being my coach since 1995.
That's Larry.
So that's pretty impressive. All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. We would love to bring you back sometime, Mac, and continue this conversation, because you are just, like I said at the top of the hour, a wealth of knowledge. We could learn so much from you every time we do get to speak with you. I know, and I speak for all of us at Wisconsin Voices, we value you. We value your opinions. We value the strength that you continue to give us as a team, and all the input you give us on our advisory committee. So we thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today and giving a little piece of your insight for us here during Recovery Month. We will be back on next week, Wednesday at 1 o'clock with another advisory council member, Fred Garcia. So he will be joining us as well to talk about all the things he's been doing down in the Waukesha area. So, okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.